Recently, I saw the anime 5 centimeters per second, which was the second film I've watched from anime director Makoto Shinkai, the first one being Your Name in January. There are some strong contrasts as well as parallels between these two films, which prompted my interest to know what other movies this guy has made. Finding out he has only made like a couple of movies, I decided to watch all of them to make a ranking video, which is what is happening right here today. I'm ranking Makoto Shinkai films from worst to best. To be eligible, a title has to be a feature film or a short film of over 5 minutes in length. So his work on commercials or his low-budget black and white OVAs from the 90s are not on the list. And obligatory, these are all my opinions and there will be more spoilers than in an OPE. Without further ado, let's begin the ranking. And my least favorite Shinkai film is The Place Promised in Our Early Days. Since I've seen other people dislike this one as well, I don't feel the need to go all too in-depth here. The plot is so uninteresting that I genuinely lost my attention and had to watch it in 2 sittings. The main issue here for me is that the characters and their emotional core, about this girl that our main characters both have feelings for, she suddenly disappears stuff. It seems so detached from the sci-fi plot it is put in. They are just dwelling around as civilians and they don't really seem to have much of a say in the matter, while other characters sometimes explain the plot to us through a lot of exposition. I just find the plot very dumb and uninteresting. I mean, there's this gigantic tower. It is there to connect to parallel worlds and transfer matter, but we don't see that happen at all. And the girl, I forgot her name, she is connected to it somehow. What does not do this movie any favors is how monotonous the color palette is. Most scenes that are inside have this very pink reddish filter on it and some lighting effects that make it look like it's dawn. And that can be beautiful and atmospheric on itself, but if that is what happens in the majority of scenes, if the majority of scenes have that like atmosphere, it's not going to be very interesting on a visual level. And on top of that, the characters, their conflicts and motivations are also just very basic. The movie is by no means terrible. It's not like there's any one thing that I absolutely despise about it. So I guess for the lowest pick on the list, Shinkai's worst movie, and by the way, his feature-length debut, it could have been a lot worse. We gotta give him that. And I think that the beginning wasn't that bad. Like, the setup was interesting, and if they worked out the characters to be more interesting, and if the sci-fi aspect was kept, maybe made them tie into it better, it could have worked very well. I can see the hate incoming from miles ahead, because number 7 is Weathering With You. Tenkinoko. What a disappointment. After the success of Your Name, Shinkai kinda realized that having a love story with a supernatural element and a happy ending after the guy has to save the girl, that sells. But by making Weathering With You, he literally removed everything I personally enjoyed about Your Name, and that's why it's all the way here. Now, Your Name is still coming up. I'm not going to talk about the good elements of that movie, but what does Weathering With You give us? Nothing. We get a lot of melodramatic scenes that amount to nothing. It's one of those movies that enters its climax when the viewer still feels like they're only 30 minutes in. The plot seems way too light. For a feature-length film, it's more like you're watching a TV episode. It isn't as uninteresting as The Place Promised in Our Early Days. It did keep my attention throughout on a first viewing, but I don't think I would soon go back to it. Just like The Place Promised in Our Early Days, the movie is very monotonous visually. Most of the movie is concrete cityscape in the rain, grey on grey. And even the animation quality of Shinkai's modern works cannot make that look appealing for an entire movie. There is also some cameos from Taki, Mitsuha, and supposedly some other Your Name characters, but they have no bearing on the plot whatsoever, which is fine in the case of Mitsuha and the side characters, because they're only there just for the fan service for a second, but Taki severely overstays his welcome for a cameo that adds nothing. Why not have Taki ask Hina and Hodoka to make for some nice weather at his project pitch, since he wanted to be an architect? It also makes no sense if in the ending to this movie it's been raining in Tokyo for all eternity, yet the ending to Your Name, which is hinted to have happened During the 3 year gap between the climax and the ending epilogue scene, takes place on a sunny day with only some puddles of water in a few streets, like there was a little bit of rain earlier. And lastly, a fatal flaw that keeps me from empathizing with Hodoka entirely is that there is no reason given for him to run away from home. It's clear that we were supposed to hate the harsh urban society for treating him like trash for being homeless, and his harsh treatment might make us understand his emotion-driven decisions, including saving Hina while condemning Tokyo to being flooded. But the thing is, he is there without anyone or anything at his own choice. There's no good reason given for him to run away from home, and nobody asked him about it. Therefore, I cannot fully empathize with his situation. On the upside, the characters do have more than one personality trait, and while it doesn't do anything interesting with it, I appreciate the creative effort. And I also don't think there's any particularly bad scene or moment. It's just a lot of decent, mediocre moments with little build-up as the movie progresses that makes for an uninteresting viewing experience. If you want to see a better successor to Your Name, watch Fireworks or Uchiage Hanabi, which, while also kind of light on the plot, at least has some really nice visuals and interesting, ambiguous things to think about. Number 6 is Voices of a Distant Star. This is a 25-minute OVA with a very straightforward plot that doesn't change the trajectory even a bit. They add some action as a subplot, which I did like, and if Mikako's journey into space actually followed more of a steady trajectory with more action and exploration of what's actually happening, the alien enemy, their travel, the journey they're on, if it took up the majority of the runtime, leaving a minority to the emotional core of her traveling further away from Noburo, slowly realizing that she will never see Earth again, never see her friend on Earth again, she's gonna die there. This one could have been tense, but as it is, I find myself bored because these two missing each other is like 70% of the film. It's such a straightforward message that isn't bad, but we know what's going on. But for a low-budget, self-made film, there is a lot of effort in the animation department. So let's not be harsh. Not bad, just very light on the plot. And now we have The Garden of Words. This movie is gorgeous, animating the famous Shinjuku-gyon garden in modern Shinkai style, and it engages you into the emotions of our main character, Takao. I can understand how at that age it is fun to hang out with adults and feel like you and only you, out of all the teenagers, are mature enough to interact with them. And from Yukari's perspective, she also never really goes too far. Maybe she should have mentioned that she teaches at his high school, but she redeems herself by not really responding to Takao's love confession and instead rejecting him subtextually. Also, the presentation of their interactions is really strong. They never really introduce themselves. It adds to the natural and lonesome tone of the movie. However, where this movie to me falls on its face is the plot. The first half was way too uneventful and slow, and the second half is stupid. Yukari never overcomes her situation, instead she runs away. I get that Shinkai wanted to make a movie about koi, about lonely sadness, and yes, Yukari is lonely as well. But her problem isn't just that she's lonely or that she wants to go back to Itamori where she apparently came from. No, apparently Miss Yukino or Yukari, she gets bullied on her job and she's a teacher and the people bullying her are students. So she could, I don't know, stand up for herself, demand authority, show by example that you should stand up for yourself against people who mistreat you, and mistreating others and being a brat does not reward you in life. But no, she rewards these kids for bullying her away by indeed like quitting her job and going back to Itamori. And she's apparently not emotionally mature enough to like deal with bullies at school when she is the teacher. I mean, it is just ridiculous on a story level, because in the end all we get is just them sitting around talking like Takao and Yukino, and then they grow emotionally dependent upon each other, and then she moves away. That's just the story. But also morally, it basically says that it's a good thing to just escape all your problems, even if you do have the power to solve them, right? That you should just flee the situation no matter what, and reward the very people that wrong you. That's just ridiculous. And besides of that, That part where Takao tried to stand up for her and then he got punched was just funny. I mean, sure, the guy hit him and hurt him, but it wasn't like he was throwing Takao across the room. And yet Takao goes down like that. Like, seriously, this is impossible physics. You must be like freaking Neymar to overreact this badly to a minor punch or something. Makoto Shinkai often gets called the new Hayao Miyazaki. Shinkai himself doesn't like to be compared to that because he thinks that that's on another level. Whereas another critique of this title is that they make vastly different movies. Okay, why am I even doing this? We all know what movie I'm going to talk about here. Children will chase lost voices. This movie's beginning is really the best part when they're still in the real world. And the visuals, they're gorgeous as well. Every character so far was likable. But once the adventure into Agartha begins, we are introduced to Shin. And honestly, I find this character unlikable, not deserving of a heroic portrayal, and I was so happy to see that most of the journey was absent, leaving Asuna and Morisaki to travel together without a local tour guide. The adventure is okay, it could be more exciting, it could be more creative, it could carry more character development, and there could be more of a character study than is the case here. We learn about the fate of Morisaki's wife Lisa and how he still misses her and tries to get her back, but it isn't ever related or contrasted to Asuna's objective of finding Shun to say farewell to him. And it all falls apart in the last 20 minutes, when the movie decides that Shin has to play hero and save Asuna because apparently guns don't work on the Isoku, but swords do. And instead of having the likable protagonist overcome anything, we have this unlikable character to save her. And then we get to the climax at the gate of life and death. On the story level, the climax is so rushed. For instance, Asuna has like one line of dialogue with Shun before she comes back to life. And on an emotional and philosophical level, there's also nothing to it, as there was no build-up to this moment. As I said, no contrast or conversation building up throughout the journey between Morisaki and Asuna on their views on death and mourning. So we don't have like Asuna teaching Morisaki a lesson or defeating him with his worldview. No. We have Shin, who already knew this stuff, who is already from Agartha, tell this moral in the most ridiculous way possible. Like, seriously, that's not how you put it, saying that the living are more important. No, that's not it. And on a side note, I hate how when Lisa returns and gets into Asuna's body, she was almost treated like an antagonist. She goes along with Morisaki, when earlier on it was established that she had already accepted death and that she already knew this lesson that we're supposed to take from it. But then when she comes back to life, she's suddenly all on board with possessing this little girl's body or something. Yeah, that's just also just really weird. She's almost treated like the bad guy here. In fact, you could literally take Shin out of it and still have her possess Asuna and have it end with her telling Morisaki the lesson and then leaving Asuna's body or something, right? So, promising beginning and a terrible ending. Very mediocre. And now we get to 5 centimeters per second. I like this movie. As I said, it was the movie that made me interested in seeing more of Shinkai's work. And in a way, it is like Your Name, but with the opposite conclusion. Namely, that our main character should move on and not linger on the past. A good moral, in my opinion. I think it's a better moral than this idea of, oh, there's this special person for you that will be waiting and all. This is also the first Shinkai movie that I personally really like visually. And with first, I mean first in chronological order, like as from a release date. Not the first one I saw, because I also really like how Your Name looks, but we get to that. But what brought this one down ultimately was the second episode, Cosmonaut, going over the same scenes twice when the point of the story was already clear. I mean, when you're halfway in, you've seen every scene basically, you've seen every location, and you already understand what the moral is going to be. But then they go over everything again. Speaking of which, the entire film is kind of dragging a bit. I think it would be better if there was an extra episode at the beginning focused on the childhood friendship of the two, with the first episode Cherry Blossom and the second one Cosmonaut being cut down to 12 to 15 minutes each. Then we get a more fast-paced and eventful movie, and we could relate to their relationship as to why this guy has been in love with her for all those years. But as it is still a really good movie, and I absolutely love the ending with the train scene. You know, the one that I'm constantly using as a transition. I love the bittersweet tone it has. On one hand, it's sad because Takagi sees that she has forgotten about him and she has moved on. But on the other hand, now he can at least move on himself. Nope, your name is not number one on this list despite being the most successful and a lot of people's favorite Shinkai movie ever. This movie is good, however. It is good for one basic reason. From start to finish, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's very entertaining. The fact that there's a twist in the middle of the movie makes for a very eventful plot, which goes accompanied by beautiful and diverse visuals. Now, upon first viewing, I wasn't the biggest fan of this movie. There were a lot of things that I saw as plot holes, most notably how the text messages just disappear when Taki finds out Mitsuha has been dead for 3 years. Like, I felt it was very bad time travel writing where they forgot like, oh wait, she still existed in that timeline, and they just acted like if she has never existed in the first place. However, when you actually understand the mythology and pay attention to what's said in the movie, this actually makes perfect sense. Your Name isn't really a time travel movie. It's about a mythological connection, about Musubi, between two people in different time and different place. And the Musubi's rules are that they experience the body swapping like a dream, forgetting most details after waking up, and that any direct trace to the other person will be lost. So most people who complain about the plot holes either didn't pay attention like me, or they just want to rag on it for being popular by arguments that make sense upon gut reaction. There are some minor issues, however, like the fact that Taki writes I love you on Mitsuha's hand because he realizes that Musubi will erase his name but not the expressions of his feelings, but then he is the one to suggest Mitsuha writes her name in the first place. Yeah, it should have been Mitsuha who suggested it and Taki who responded with the I love you, then it would have made sense. Another nitpick is the breast grabbing running gag, which is gross and especially jarring in the last body switch after Taki drinks the sake. Like seriously dude, you just traveled all the way to Itamori, found out your body swap buddy died 3 years ago. You get one last chance to save her life and you decide to feel her breasts again of this girl who's about to be a corpse in a day. In fact, I expected a fake out joke where the audience and the sister expect him to be feeling the breasts, but he's still hugging Mitsuha's body emotionally. That would actually be funny and it should show some character growth. I mean, it fits the beginning of the movie because it's like a rom-com-ish body swapping movie, but then halfway in, which I said, the twist rises the stakes a lot and that's really good. But yeah, that one gag shouldn't have been there in that part. I wasn't a fan of the breast grabbing in the first place, but the fact that then actually they have him do it again when they could have used that one just to show his character growth, yeah, that's really insulting. And another thing that I find a bit gross is the fact that apparently Taki has a date with his 23-year-old supervisor at work. Like seriously, she doesn't even look that old. You could have just said, if you would write this movie the same way, right? You could have just said, okay, this girl's like 19, she's just in college, she's just a few years older and working at the restaurant just a bit longer, so she's in a higher position. But the fact that they have a 7-year or 6-year age gap, right? Because Taki's 17 and Okudura is like 23, I think. That there's a 6-year age gap and a power dynamic at work, yeah, that goes a bit too far for my liking. But these are such minor nitpicks in the grand scheme of things. It will not take away from your enjoyment of the movie. And honestly, I'm just mentioning them because everyone already loves this movie. So I should clarify why I wouldn't put it at number one. But the real reason that I do not put this one at number one, by the way, the one thing that absolutely does detract from the story and the entertainment, the one thing that I will criticize it for and have to detract a lot of points for, the climax was cut short. I mean, at the point where Mitsuha confronts her father, we cut to the impact and then we go 8 years later, we have the time leap, right? And then we find indeed everyone was evacuated because Mitsuha convinced father and now Mitsuha lives in Tokyo. That conversation was the climax to the entire objective of the second half of the movie, right? Of course, there's an overarching Takui Mitsuha connection, you know, the emotional core more like that. But in the second half of the movie, at least, the material objective is to save Mitsuha's life and save Itamori, right? Because otherwise she's dead and then you're also not going to meet each other after all. So the second half of this movie just builds up to something that we don't see pay off. And there could be some extra emotional weight to the climax. I mean, Mitsuha and her father, they have a strained relationship since the mother died. So this scene could have a lot of character development. Mitsuha standing up for herself, father seeing mother in her, I don't know. Secondly, if we actually could see Mitsuha successfully saving the entire town, The contrast to her older self in the epilogue as some random mid-20s lady walking the streets of Tokyo, in my opinion, it could also have a lot of impact, a lot of meaning. So she always wanted to move to the city, but she was far more noticeable, far more popular and well respected in this little town where her father was mayor than she would ever be in Tokyo, where she's just another woman. If we actually got to see Mitsuha confront her father, then this movie would be a masterpiece. But it's still a really good movie nonetheless. Start to finish, it's entertaining, unpredictable, beautiful, and while characters are very basic in personality, they really engage you into the story and into their emotions. The best scenes will have to be the Twilight scene, where they get to experience each other through all emotions possible in the span of 2 minutes, and the ending, where they actually do meet again, as was fitting for the movie, unlike in 5 centimeters per second, but in a very reserved way. Most other movies with such plot end with the two regaining their memories and embracing in a passionate kiss or something. But the fact that this doesn't happen, they don't even hug, and they don't regain anything, ensures that viewers will have this one stick with them. They're not giving the emotional relief they were expecting, so you're not going to be over this movie very soon if you were invested. Some people cry to this movie and some think the animation is good. I just love the story. So I'm not in the Your Name hate camp, and I'm also not putting it at number 1. What movie can possibly be better than Your Name? Well, let's just say what film. Short films over 5 minutes are included. Voices of a Distant Star is already a short of over 5 minutes, namely 25. And there's another short, the only short film really that Makoto Shinkai has made since his feature film debut, The Place Promised in Our Early Days. And that film is Someone's Gaze. At 7 minutes, this is not just the shortest, but also the best of the titles on this list. It's an odd one, but it's really fitting, released in between Children Who Chase Lost Voices and The Garden of Words. This is the only Shinkai film with an adult protagonist, and it works very well. Within a 7-minute time span, it gives a beautiful and touching portrayal of both struggles of adult life, in a way that doesn't make our main character look as unstable as Yukino, and of a child drifting away from her parents, emphasizing the importance of family bonds. It is beautiful, realistic and heartwarming within 7 minutes. This is the kind of emotional core and message that would have made Children Who Chase Lost Voices amazing. But it is never too late to adapt the development laid out here into a feature-length film with an awesome plot. If you've noticed, I've been more negative than positive in this video. But don't think this means that I think Shinkai is a bad director or storyteller. The fact that I was willing to see all his films, and like 3 out of 8 of them, puts him higher than most. This channel is the bored binge watcher. I can easily get bored while watching something, which was unfortunately the case for half of Shinkai's films. Beautiful visuals and good presentation of messages and themes are an amazing addition to an already decent entertaining film, making an already fun experience a masterpiece. They cannot serve a boring viewing experience. While I can see what Shinkai was trying to tell, for instance in The Garden of Words, I would be lying in my review if I was more positive of it. Nonetheless, the 2 highest picks are solid 8 out of 10s or higher, which is a rating I barely ever give. And number 3 and 4 have some really good qualities and could have easily been that as well. And the worst pick on the list was again not really a bad, terrible movie. It was just very stupid and boring. Watching all these films certainly made me curious to his upcoming movie Suzume no Tojimari. But we will have to see once that comes out.